Today I'm going to be talking to Elle McNicoll, author of children's book A Kind of Spark, which features an autistic protagonist, 11-year-old Addie. This novel has been published by inclusive children's publishers Knights of and is available to pre-order right now. Obviously, this year the publishing industry is having to adapt a great deal with regards to publicity, so I hope we can all support autistic authors, creatives, and so on, since so much has had to be cancelled, events, festivals, things that many authors rely on to generate publicity and sales. I was incredibly impressed with A Kind of Spark. It's her debut novel and moved me to tears in parts. I know. So it's a children's book and I was crying, yes. So I'm incredibly honored to have her here today. Welcome, Elle. It's great to meet you in a sort of 2020 kind of way. How are you doing today?
Hi, Sam. I'm well, and it's like a real honor to be doing this with you. Like, it's really a real privilege and a treat for me today. So.
Oh, well, thank you for coming on today. I appreciate it. Right. So just tell me very briefly, what inspired you to write A Kind of Spark? Do you have a background in publishing or writing?
Yes, and it's quite a long story. I've been in and out of the publishing industry for about 3 years now. The dream of being an author was never even something I considered, because so many teachers and so many people said, do not even bother, that is not attainable. So I really wanted to be an editor, and for years in the industry I was pushing for neurodiversity in publishing. I was pushing for more own voices, authors, and just a bigger presence for neurodiversity in general. And I would get some really hostile, in the early years, some very hostile responses. So I was very frustrated with the industry, and I was very sick and tired of going to diversity and inclusivity panels where there was no mention of disability or neurodiversity in any of the discussions. And I thought, why are 20% of the population not being represented in this industry, especially when I have a lot of friends who have all kinds of disabilities and they're all readers. So I just thought, why is this happening? And it's not just about writers not being represented, it's about people who are actually in the industry. There's not a lot of neurodivergent editors, publishers, reviewers, or even lit agents, the people who kind of gatekeep the stories. I was frustrated with the industry, and I sat down and wrote the book for myself, as a book that I would have wanted to read as an 11-year-old, but also what I thought the industry needed. I was frustrated as well with reading a lot of the books about autism written by neurotypical people, with the same red flags coming up and the same problematic representations. It's quite lucky in a way. The book's not an angry book. It's a very, I like to think, a wholesome book. But I was very angry when I wrote it. For people who obviously won't know the story, it's about a girl who's autistic, and she's campaigning for a memorial to be made for the witches that were killed in her Scottish village hundreds of years ago. But the scenes where Addie is going up against the town assembly members and they're not meeting her halfway, that's very much me in the industry. That's what it felt like to try and get these powerful people who claim that they want to be inclusive. It was trying to get them to listen, and it just wasn't happening. But my publishers are very different. So I'm not talking about my publishers.
Talking about the book that you wanted to read when you were at that age, I think when I was a teenager, I read, The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, which is probably one of the more famous representations of autistic people in children's literature, or young adult, I'm not sure. But I remember reading that as a teenager, and I didn't relate to it at all.
It's really interesting, because for a long time, it was the autism book. It was really and still is actually, to a lot of people come up to me or came up to me before this pandemic at events, and they'd go, "Oh, have you read Curious Incident?" Just kind of like, of course I have read Curious Incident. Yeah. It's interesting. Mark Haddon is not autistic, and is but just thought it was interesting to write about. And what's really interesting is to read, since the book came out, he's come out and said, like, please don't take this book as a guidebook for autism, because I think police officers and social workers have used the book for their own work with the community, and he's had to say, like, stop, it's a fictional story. But that's a great example of how powerful children's books are, and why you have to, why own voices is so important, because these marginalized kids are real and they deserve representation that's not going to endanger them in any way.
So you mentioned that you were kind of discouraged from writing. Have you always been a writer as a child and as a teenager?
Yes, definitely. I think a lot of kids that are very voracious readers naturally start to write. I think it's a very common hobby. Yeah, it was definitely a hobby I loved, but everybody said this is not a career, and it's especially not a career for you. You kind of start to believe all the terrible things that people tell you about yourself. And so it felt quite natural to me at that age. I was like, oh, of course I couldn't. No, of course, yeah, that makes perfect sense, which is really sad in a lot of ways. You know, we talk a lot about, I say we, I mean people, the industry, you know, we talk a lot about how important it is for every child to see themselves in a book, and, you know, what it's like for a lot of, excuse me, people who grow up who are marginalized in some way and they don't see themselves in books. But actually, one of the hardest things about that is you don't actually write yourself for a long time. You don't give yourself permission to write about your identity or your lived experience. You know, I was writing about neurotypical people for a long time. You know, it never occurred to me that I was allowed to write about this thing that was different about me. That was something I thought that had to be very hidden and kept away from my writing. And it felt a little bit like being out in, you know, a very open space after years of being like safely, you know, in the wood or something. I was like, this is feel very exposed. It's very raw. After reading a couple of books for my master's research, MG books, so the same category that my book is in, that had autistic characters in them and were very problematic. And I just thought, this, like, if not now, when? like it's just, I was like, I just wanted, and this is a very neurodivergent thing as well. I was like, I want to correct this, and I want to make it good and correct. This can't be the only story we keep reading over and over again. You know, that's a burden, and that it's, you know, really the story is always about the family members and not the child. And I just was absolutely sick and tired of reading the same thing over and over again.
You know, in a kind of spark, it is actually very centered around the family in some ways, but not from an outside perspective. It's right in the thick of what being in a mixed neurodivergent family is like. And I thought that was very interesting.
Thank you. And one thing as well, which is very different, is there are two autistic characters in this book. There's an older sibling who is autistic, you know, because no 11-year-old knows enough, you know, about I mean, with the greatest respects to 11-year-olds, I know, but, you know, like, I need a little bit of an older voice just to kind of pipe in. And so Addie's older sister Katie is openly autistic, and their relationship's kind of the heart of the book. And it's just an example of how you can invert those tropes and just be like, I'm going to have two autistic characters, and I'm not going to apologize for that. It's very normal. And their relationship is really, it's interesting. It's picked up a lot more by autistic readers than by, you know, holistic readers. And that's quite special to me. But I was very deliberate that at no point did the family ever kind of go, oh, you know, I wish, you know, I love you, but I don't love your autism. That kind of harmful messaging. The family are all very tight and very protective, and that was very important to me when I wrote it.
Are you more of an Addie or more of a, what's her name, Katie?
Katie.
Like, which is one of them you, or is one of them kind of like inspired by you? Who do you relate to in that?
Addie was me as a young child. Very wide-eyed, very fair-minded, and quite optimistic, and quite you know, enthusiastic. And Katie is definitely me as an adult, with that little seed of bitterness, and that, you know, the little clip on the shoulder, and just a little bit kind of roughed around by the world a bit. And her presence in the book is also, it's really there for adult autistic readers, you know, wherever they are, you know, pre-diagnosis, post-diagnosis, whatever valid part of the journey they're on, she's kind of there for them to be like, I see that it's not easy being an adult who's autistic. I see it's actually in so many ways harder than being a child with who's autistic. You know, I didn't want in any way for the book to say that neurodivergence is a burden, but I also didn't want to go down the superpower road because these are human beings. When you have a neurodivergence, she has that pressure to always be doing great and always say like, look, this thing is positive. I'm really great. But of course you're a human, and no human is great every single day. And there's no exception whether you're neurotypical or neurodivergent. And masking is giving her a really hard time. And she's scared if she reveals that Addie will go, well, then I'm going to end up like that. And I'm going to be, unhappy too. That was really what I was trying to say with her, was that she's this incredibly bright, outgoing, educated, going places that nobody in her family has gone before, despite all these obstacles. But sometimes that is very hard to kind of bear.
Yeah. So a theme that is very prominently featured is witches and witchcraft, because obviously Addie discovers that these women a few centuries ago were accused of being witches and basically tortured and killed. And so witchcraft becomes kind of a parallel to autism in a lot of ways. Why do you think it is that autistic people are drawn to witches? Because I think almost every autistic person I know went through like a witch phase when they were about 12 or something.
Agreed.
So why do you think that is?
When I was doing my research on the witches, which was really early on in the process, I was reading these, I'm Scottish and it's about the Scottish witch trials. And I think Scotland killed more women than I think anyone else in the world for witchcraft, which is horrendously embarrassing. But I was reading these accounts that had been made, very kind of brief, quick accounts at the time. And I was reading all these women and what they were being accused of. And I was like, I recognize a lot of these behaviors that are being described. It was very familiar to me. Some of it sounded like stimming, some of it sounded like, self-soothing, some of it sounded just like people who wanted to be left alone, quite honestly. And I thought, this isn't the kind of glamorous witchcraft that I've grown up thinking about, where it was, the sort of beautiful feminist witches that people wanted to hunt down. And I was like, no, these people are vulnerable and they're real people. There was something very real about a lot of the cases that I was reading. And that's when it clicked for me for the story. I was like, oh, they're neurodivergent, or they have learning difficulties, or they have, some kind of difference about them that would not have been in any way easy to support or manage when you were living in the 1600s. If anyone behaves in a small town or village in any way that is a little bit kind of different, they're immediately labeled and they're immediately talked about by everybody. And in terms of being fascinated by witches, I am completely the same. I went through a long witch period. I think about 8 Halloweens were just witches after there was never anything else. But the idea of witchcraft and having a little bit of power and a little bit of control about you is, I think, very, very seductive. And when they're so often portrayed as kind of outsiders that live off on their own, I know I relate to that a lot. Just being kind of away from the crowd. So yeah, I definitely, those parallels were so apparent to me, and it was a real light bulb moment. I was like, oh, of course, that's what we're going to write about.
So other than witches, I guess, what are your special interests? Are they the ones that made it into the book? Like Addie's special interest was sharks, I think.
Yeah, I'm ashamed to say that sharks are a big special interest. That's not imaginative on my part for the book. It is genuinely, it's really a shark manual disguised as a children's book that I hope no one would really know. No, but no, I love sharks. I love musical theatre to the point of obsession, and I'm being very careful with my special interests not to go off. But and
I did ask.
Fashion. I worked in fashion for a few years, and I genuinely just love talking about fashion, and chokers as well. My @ on Twitter is Books and Chokers, because I have a real, not wearing one right now, funnily enough, but I'm a real love of chokers, and which is very niche and very specific, but they're a really incredible piece of jewelry. They've been around since as long as humans have, and just find them really interesting. But sometimes people are like, why is it books and chokers? And I'm like, don't ask.
I'm kind of curious as to how neurotypical people who've read the book, how they've been receiving it. Do they get it? Do they just say, "Oh, well, that's a nice book"? Like, what is their reaction?
I've been very lucky that I've had a lot of really great people be very nice about the book, particularly teachers, librarians. The word that keeps coming up, which I still don't really know how to feel about. No, I should feel good. I'm very grateful. But people go, "Oh, it's a very important book," and I kind of go like, "Is it?" And they're like, "It's very important." I'm like, I guess. Like the really gorgeous messages are always from, autistic reviewers who've had a quick read. People saying, if I had read this when I was that age, I probably would have been diagnosed quicker. But yeah, neurotypical people are always like, it's an important book. Oh yeah.
Is that just like their code for saying like, oh, it's so brave of you to write it? Because that's when I was diagnosed and I like didn't know what else to do, so I put a Facebook post because I didn't want to have that conversation over it. Everyone was like, wow, that was so brave of you, and I'm like, but it wasn't. But yeah, and so that I don't know what it is. I don't know whether that's like maybe patronizing. In a little way, but it is an important book. So
that's the thing. But I don't want to agree and be like, you're right, it's a very important book. I hope it's an important book. I want it to be important to autistic people, and I want it to be important to neurodivergent people. And I know not everyone's going to like it. It's impossible for everyone to like it. But, it's own voices. So if people don't like it, we can at least have that, we can say, look, we're coming from different places, whether it's neurotypical authors who write about autism and they get praised by neurotypical reviewers and neurotypical readers. And I just always kind of think like, do you know what you're talking about? Like, and then the author will always do an interview and be like, oh, I'd never thought about autism before I started writing the book. And I'm like, it shows. When people say it's an important book, I kind of think, good, then, let it be important, that it kind of makes the shift so that own voices can be the norm and not the exception. So,
and the thing about sort of neurodiversity is that because it's completely invisible, it's like we sit among them. It's like we're already there, and people just don't have a good idea of what it looks like because. I feel like with racism and kind of like bigotry towards LGBT plus that community, it seems like those movements are decades ahead of the neurodiversity movement. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I feel like we just start, maybe that's like, my own bias because I'm just starting.
No, exactly. And actually, I think it was Steve Silberman who said this, but I don't want to be quoted on that. I think he said, because he's a gay man as well, he said, the neurodiversity, we're 20 years behind the gay movement. It's his identity, but it's jarred in a way because in one respect, there's huge problems with homophobia. And that's the thing. Nobody, when they're talking about racism or ableism, is saying, well, they have this much of the pie, so I want this much. Not at all. Inclusivity and equality is not a pie, but definitely, it's invisible and unfortunately, and there is the whole thing of you don't look autistic or you're high functioning, which I hate, and again that's referenced in the book. It's really, I think stories are a great way to get people to understand that, because it just doesn't seem to be computing for a lot of people, and definitely not in my industry. I think if you were to get the most neurotypical industry in the world, it would be publishing. They just like their little kind of people. And that's what's holding them back.
And how did you start working with, they're called Knights of, aren't they?
Yeah.
Like Knights of the Round Table kind of thing? Or?
Exactly right. Amy and David, who started it, are proper believers in inclusivity, because in publishing you get a lot of people who do the lip service who are like, well, we care a lot about diversity, but no. So they started their own company and they called it Knights of, exactly as you said, Knights of the Round Table. Everybody has a place. There's no head of the table. There's no hierarchy. And they hire inclusively, as well as, looking for inclusive books. My editor was autistic. My illustrators got ADHD. They made sure that the team they hired were all neurodivergent as well. Which never happens. That never happens. So that was incredible. And they pay everyone fairly. They don't have unpaid interns running around. But they should probably show the book. Nobody's seen it yet. But that's Kay Wilson.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, that is a neurodivergent cover. Like
Yeah.
it is so different.
Squiggly.
Yeah.
It's like my hair today,
Yeah.
you know, it's like, yeah. No, I really like the cover actually.
Yeah, me too. But they just treated me like a person after 3 years of the industry kicking my ass.
Mhm.
They were accessible and they were warm and welcoming and they meant what they said. They actually did care about inclusive kids books.
Do you have any tips for maybe my autistic viewers or neurodivergent viewers who are looking to get into either publishing or looking to become published authors?
So I would 100% encourage you to go guns blazing. And there are also departments that might not be as neurotypical as editorial. I think things like production and rights are probably, if you don't, whatever your area is, please don't be discouraged, because I when I'm not writing, my thing is neurodiversity and publishing. It's what I talk about, and I want to see more people in this industry. So
Yeah.
please don't be discouraged. And in terms of writing, do it. Just do it. Write the thing, get it done. Look at indie presses because they do things differently, and they helped me find my agent after signing me. So, they do things a little bit differently. So if, don't feel that you have to do the traditional thing with the big five houses and lit agents, you can do indie presses. So just do the thing. Like, don't wait for permission. I spent so much of my life, letting ableism, like I let that put limits on me. I put limits on myself for so long, and I didn't give myself permission for a long time. So just do the thing. Don't wait for anyone to say it's time, because no one ever will. So just do the thing.
Yeah, exactly. So now it's time for you to give it like a complete shameless plug for your book. When and where is it available? How can people buy it? Please, everybody, buy it because it's fantastic.
Please buy it. Because please buy it, because I've been telling the industry for years. I've been like, people will buy Own Voices books, so if people don't buy this book, I will look like an idiot. You can buy it in the UK. Waterstones and Blackwell's are your best bets. Their delivery service is great right now, mid-pandemic. But also check out your local indies and see what they're doing. If you're in the Southern Hemisphere, Booktopia are going to have it, I think. But yeah, Waterstones, Blackwell's, and your local indies, because they need your support right now.
What about in the US? Do you know about that?
Maybe next year. We're not allowed to talk about it, but yeah.
Oh, right. Sorry.
But Waterstones ship globally, and Roundtable Books, who are a great independent kids store in Brixton, also ship globally when they're back from furlough, which maybe by the time the book comes out on the 4th of June.
So thank you so much, Elle, for taking the time to talk to me. I hope it goes really well with the launch. I am going to buy some copies. Actually, I've got some friends that I want to give to, and maybe do a giveaway or something on my Instagram at YoSamdySam. So I will put all the details, the links of places you can buy it in the description box below. And I hope that you guys will support this fantastic book. So thank you so much for watching, and thank you for joining me, Elle. It was really great to chat. I kind of want to stop recording and like carry on talking a bit.
Thank you so much. This has been such a treat, really. Thank you.
Have a great rest of quarantine or lockdown or whatever it is where you're from, and that I hope that you'll be able to get out for some launches and stuff like that soon.
Thank you.
Take care then. Bye.
I really hope you enjoyed this interview. If you want to watch the entire thing, please consider joining my members-only Discord for a small monthly fee. You help support this channel, get access to a community, giveaways and other exclusive content, so hope to see you there soon. All the information is in the description box below.